My name's Balazs. I'll just give you a quick background about myself and where the company has come from, and then we'll go into what Provenir is. It's on-farm processing, and that's just the start. There's 1,000 questions that come after that, so we'll go through that. And a little bit about our journey and the hurdles that we've had to overcome to get to the point that we are now. And the point that we're at now is this week we're going to be doing a commissioning trial on my farm, processing a cow in the unit itself, and then next week we'll be going for licensure in New South Wales. So I had the opportunity to come here. We're absolutely flat stick at the moment finishing the unit, but this was too good an opportunity to miss out. My background is I'm a scientist by trade, a farmer by choice. So I see the world through the prism of a scientist. Everything's a big experiment, and I'm not particularly fearful of failure. I see failure as the best way of learning, and with the amount of failures that I've had, I'm one of the most learned people around. So Provenir, as I was introduced, was a company that was formed 5 years ago. The 5 founders all came together under the principles of animal welfare. We were all involved in the livestock industry in various capacities. Myself as a farmer, and I had a small scale paddock to plate company. We also have a veterinarian, a meat inspector. We have a chef, we have a marketer, and like all good startups, we've got a lawyer on the board as well, which helps us with the regulatory minefield that we go through. So Provenir is all about on-farm processed meat, bringing this concept to Australia. It's not novel in the world. It's been done in other countries to various degrees, some well, some not so well. We call it highest welfare because we look at the life of the animal right up to the point of consumption. And our view is that the current system fails the animal in the final couple of days. This is not by choice, this is because this is the way the industry is, and we decided that we wanted to change that industry, so here we are. And for our product, we're very focused on grass-fed, which ties in beautifully with holistic management and what we've been talking about today. So Provenir, tagline is to love your meat. There's a big consumer awakening, particularly in Australia, about where does our food come from? Is it regenerative? Is it industrial? And we want to actually be transparent about that process and promote the regenerative side of farming and make sure that that's got a place in the consumer's choice of meat. So on-farm processing. So when we started, it was really about what is the problem, and I think the success of our model is very much about there is 2 problems that are connected through one solution. So from my paddock to plate company that I was running for the last 7 years, I very much knew about the consumer dilemma that is increasing every day, and that's about where is my food coming from? I've become so disconnected in the city to what's actually happening in the country. How do I know whether this meat that I'm eating, how was it produced, how was it slaughtered? There's a lot of these questions that are coming. And then for me as a farmer, is I was producing these cattle. I was very close to them. I probably love my cattle the same amount as I love my grass. So for me, it was always really hard to put them on the back of the truck. So even to the extent that I went and bought my own livestock cattle truck and transported them myself, which was commercially stupid for me to do, driving a truck with 2 head of cattle in there. But that's actually really what motivated me. I just couldn't stand popping them on the back. So if I was going to do it, I was going to do it myself. So the solution is, and this is a picture of the unit itself, is our mobile processing unit. So it's inherently an abattoir on the back of a semi-trailer. It's pretty much the largest semi-trailer that you can put on the road with a shitload of permits and conditions that we've really pushed the National Heavy Vehicle Registration System to its absolute limits. The top pops up about 2.5 metres, which enables an internal space of 4.5 metres, which is tall enough to hang by Achilles the average 650 to 700 kilo carcass. There's a ramp that comes down the bottom here, and the entire process occurs within the truck itself. There's another unit that draws alongside it, which is a collection of all the inedible resources, and the meat itself. So there's two sections. There's a refrigerated section and a non-refrigerated section. Then that vehicle goes back to a static but relocatable, what we call hub, which is basically a butchery. And there the further processing into retail ready and restaurant cuts enabled from there. So that's the supply chain end to end from there. So our unique value proposition is that on-farm processing eliminates live transport. There's lots of talk at the moment about how can we do this better, and I think that's a great conversation to be having. How can we transport them better? How can we give them better feed beforehand? Because most of you would be familiar with the glycogen bucket that gets exhausted through the process, which has detrimental effects to the meat quality on the other side. We've been brave enough and said, why don't we just eliminate it? Okay, so let's not take the animals off the farm. Let's do it all on the farm. That comes with a whole lot of headaches, which we're going to go through now. So it's not a simple proposition, but that's our proposition. So most of what I wanted to talk to today, because you guys are all leaders in your fields, you're very aware of the industry that you're in, is I wanted to talk about how for us we had to forge a new path. So, you know, everyone talks about innovation being exciting and sexy and all of that. It's painful, it's sleep depriving, it's a great pathway to poverty. But if you've actually got a real desire and the right team around you, we're really hoping that on the other side of this, it's going to be profitable and it'll actually start steering the industry in what we think is the right way to go. So we're going to talk about regulatory hurdles. We see them as hurdles, not as walls, so we can get over them. Farmer adoption of change has been a really interesting one that we've gone through as well, so we'll talk a bit about that. Industry resistance. How we've come up against industry, and it'll be interesting for you to note of where we've had most of the resistance. And then we're going to talk a little bit about consumer awareness and education. So starting off with regulatory hurdles, first thing you have to do is discard common sense, leave logic at the front door, and have a shitload of resilience and persistence, because in the Australian regulatory system, and I imagine it's quite similar the world over, it's incredibly fragmented. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but the laws that are written, which were generally written 30 to 40 years ago and have little bearing on the current consumer market, is what we have to comply with, and that's what we've done. So indeed, it's a pathway to madness. I would recommend dipping into it only for short periods of time and then coming out, just for sanity's sake. In Australia, we've got a state-based regulatory system with a federal overlay, with councils applying the state's interpretation of the national legislation, overlaid by the legislations, the acts, and the bylaws that are passed by council in certain circumstances. So what applies in one place is completely different in another place, which is ignored in another place, which is enforced in another place. So it really is a case-by-case basis, which is perfect for a mobile solution because we get to hit every hurdle as we travel around. So the one thing that is apparent to us now is, with the politicians, there is a desire to change the regulations for more transparency, for improved animal welfare. So the desire exists at the political level. We just have to get the regulators and the legislators to understand what the political and the consumer demand is and start to change the laws. So, you know, who would say that you can change the laws in Australia? Not one. Well, we have and will. There's the pillar bill that has been introduced into the Victorian Parliament, which includes two words, which is all that we need changed, to allow mobile abattoirs to be licensed in Victoria. It took about 4 years of lobbying, persistence, showing the economic benefit, but it is currently sitting in the second reading in the lower house of the Assembly in Victoria. It'll have its third reading later this month, hopefully. Next month, sorry. And then it'll go to the upper house, and with the current political structure in the Victorian upper house, it'll get passed. So persistence does pay. Thank you. But with the system that we have, We actually have to meet food safety. AS 4696 2007, I could recite it to you backwards. We know that absolutely. It talks about the design of abattoirs and butcheries with regards to the production of meat for human consumption. So that's the overarching federal standard that we have to meet, and then every state has its own interpretation of that, in which you have to apply for licence within that state. So when we have a look at that, and we've done an analysis of all of Australia, New South Wales is where we're going to be launching, because it's very clearly written in the legislation that an abattoir could be mobile. I'm almost certain that when it was written 40 years ago, it was a complete oversight that someone just wrote "and vehicle" with no recognition of what that would actually mean. And the regulators have said, yes, it clearly says vehicle, you are a vehicle and it's an abattoir, so we can licence you. You have to meet the same standards as everybody else, which we don't ask for any dispensation, but the legislation allows this to happen. Road regulation is something that we've only recently found probably has less sense than food laws. And now, with our good timing, there has been a new national heavy vehicle road registration system that's been put into place, and apparently we are the first company to hit multiple occasions of how does an oversized truck exist, does it go to here and there. So again, we're forging a new path in that space, and in fact we had to drive the truck back unregistered from WA back to Victoria, which took 4 days and ministerial involvement to allow us to do it, and it wasn't checked once. Had no number plates, had chipboard on the side of the unit, and we drove it all the way back. So the regulations and enforcement are two different things. Obviously, this is a dangerous workplace. There's heavy machinery, there's live animals, so the occupational health and safety considerations have to be at the forefront in the design. EPA, again, is a really interesting state-by-state proposition. The volume of what we're doing is well below any limits that exist for biological waste management on a farm, but still puts the EPA into a flat spin, knowing that the eviscerate of 10 cows could be buried on a farm. So the first thing that they raise is, well, what about the biosecurity risks? Well, good question. You didn't care about the animal shitting on the ground for the last 2 years, so why do you care about us burying 2 days of half-processed shit? So a lot of this has come through, but I guess the point to this is, if you're going down this pathway, there are people who are supportive in government and in council. You have to find them. You have to be persistent. If they say no, just take it and say, okay, I'm going to move on to the next person who'll say yes, because you'll find them. Farmer adoption of change. This has been a really interesting one. So just a quick, and be honest here, put your hands up if you think that this is in concept a good idea. Okay, well that's pretty good. The rubber hits the road, so to say, is when we actually sit down and start talking to the farmers about what this actually means. Okay, so we can do 10 to 12 a day. Oh, really? Well, we normally put 40 on the back of a truck, so what do? Can you be here for 4 days? Yeah, we can be here for 4 days. Okay, right. So, and I want to do it at peak season, so I want to make sure that I get the best prices, the market's up. So, well, there's a problem, because we can only be at one farm at one time, and there's going to be a period, oh shit, so I can't lock in absolutely that date? No, we have to move around, that's the way it works. Okay, so you want it grass finished? Yep, okay, well we normally just send them off to the feedlots. Okay, do you like feedlots? No, not much, I only do it because I have to. What about carrying it for an extra 100 kilos, so 3 months to get it up to the weight that we like, which is around the 450 to 550 weight range? Oh, that's going to be really tough. I'm going to run into summer, I'm not going to be sure. So whilst we have gone from the concept of people saying this is fantastic, when we actually talk about the logistics of how it works, we've found that some farmers have just gone, you know what, this doesn't work for my system. And others have said, it doesn't work for my system, but I'm going to change. And it might take me 12 months, it might take me 18 months, but we can change. And we have the conversations about, we're small scale, we'll do 2,500 in a year. So, but it's the start. So when we actually talk about being able to transition to this system, We talk to farmers and say, you know what, we're not going to be able to take all of your stock, but we can take your early cusp and we can take your late cusp, and that could work. You still go to the feedlots. And so it's finding a way to work in with farmers and farmers to work in with us as well. Our onboarding process for farmers takes around about 2.5 months. There was 2 of our farmers here today which have just had to leave. A lot of information has to go onto it about the yards, about the access, the legal liabilities, who's responsible, what is my requirements, what happens with the eviscerate. It's a complex system. So we're very careful about the farmers that we work with, and we give them a lot of opportunity to ask all those questions. Our farmer information pack is about 8 pages, and that just goes through everything from pricing to the condition of the animals, how ante-mortem inspection occurs, how post-mortem inspection occurs, condemned animals, all of that. So it's quite an involved process from there. Product is on farm regularly, so you've got to be happy that this is going to happen on your farm upwards of 6, 7, 8 times a year. So people have to be comfortable with that. The product traceability that we'll talk a little bit later about is specific to the farm. So our company policy is about transparency in the industry, so true paddock to plate transparency. So we have to tell the story about the farmers, how they raise their animals, what they're fed on, their practices and so forth. That's what the consumers want to know, and that's what we want the consumers to know, to have that understanding. So they've got to be comfortable with that as well. Having their farm viewed on we've got a mobile app that actually connects for people to actually have a look at that. So that's one of the things. And then we come down to the farm infrastructure as well, the yarding, the access and so forth. So there's a sort of practical logistics of it as well. So this is one of our farmers as well, just up here in the Holbrook region as well. So that's Jill. Now we're going to talk a bit about industry resistance, and everyone's just gone, the big boy's going to come and get you. We haven't seen that at all. We know that they've been in a number of our presentations, generally up the back, scribbling notes. But besides them understanding what we're doing, we really haven't had any resistance from them at all. Where we have, interestingly, had the resistance is when we go to sell the Provenir product, and the value proposition is that we own the meat and then we sell it under our brand with the traceability back to the farm that we actually purchased the animal from. So that way we actually sort of protect the IP and the branding of the story. Is we've gone and reached out with what we thought were well-aligned brands. These are well-known brands. I could tell you their names and you'd know them straight away. And the bit that we come up time again is when we're doing better, it's perceived as a threat to doing good. So when they sit there and they talk about the meat that we have comes from grass-fed and genuine farmers up in this region and that region, and we say, well, that's great, that sounds like a company that's aligned to us. And then we go and talk and they say, this is fantastic. And then the marketing person goes, crap, if this is really, really good, does that make everything else on our menu bad? Are we going to all of a sudden, have this standout product where we want to have selection and choice? That's fine, but don't have something so good that it makes everything else look bad. This is something that we're having to spend a lot of time working through. And this is what disruption is as well. It's uncomfortable. And it's not just uncomfortable for those being disrupted, it's uncomfortable for those doing the disruption as well. That's what we have to work through and say, look, yes, we think it is a better way to go. Does it mean that everything else on your menu or your shelf of meat is bad? No, it doesn't. It provides an option, it provides a point of difference, and it provides a system that we think is better. Let the consumer's choice make that. So that's been something that we've had to work through, which has been really surprising for us because the immediate is, yeah, we love it. And then they drill down, it's like, how do we put this product alongside our other products? Innovation takes risk. Everyone's very happy for innovation to occur and governments fund it and everyone thinks it's sexy and great and yeah, we'll jump on board these innovative new companies, but we're not going to take any risk. No, you take all the risk, you provide it at the same cost as everybody else that is a big, large scale, and then we'll have a consider. Actually, can you do it a bit cheaper? because that would be really good. Then I can get it past the CEO, no problems. So this is a bit that we're talking about, is like when you're doing this, and we are an integrated company, so we hit risk points in a number of spots, is we need to get our offtake partners and our other partners along the process to understand that this comes with risk. That is what innovation is. So they actually have to have a bit of appetite for taking some of the risk as well. Because everyone says, I love what you do, but I don't want to take any risk. So that's part of our journey, is saying, okay, how do we share some of that risk? If you want to be with an innovative company that's disrupting, you've got to be part of the solution, not just taking the rewards of it. And the last bit here is the key to actually getting through industry resistance, and this is something that I've spoken to a number of farmers about, is as farmers, and Charlie said this before and I 100% agree with it, you're not livestock producers, you're food producers. And as soon as people understand that, and understand that your customer is not the stock agent, it's not the abattoir, it's not the sale yards, it's the person who's going to consume your meat. If you can connect with them, and Charlie does it beautifully, like to be in Victor Churchill is like up there, we hope to be there one day. If you can connect that through, then you actually change from being a price taker to a price maker. So start seeing the person who, the end consumer, the person who actually buys your product, whether it be wheat, apples or whatever, start targeting them, start understanding what their needs are, what they want, and you'll start doing a lot better. So that's what we're targeting here as well. We've got a really active Facebook page and online campaign, not to connect to the restaurants and the hamburger joints and all the others that will end up buying our product. We want to get the demand coming from the consumers saying to their store owner, where's Provenir? I've seen it, I want it on the shelves. That's the key, and that will break industry resistance. Consumer awareness and education. I don't really like talking about educating consumers because it makes the implication that they're dumb. They're definitely not dumb. They may not be fully aware of the whole end-to-end system, but that's an increasing appetite for wanting to understand that, understanding all the processing. So I think there's an increasing understanding about livestock management and environmental management techniques for farmers, and there's been great steps forward in that. But the understanding the empathic two-plate is the bit that really the industry has no interest in actually shining a light on it. And because of that, it plays perfectly into those that actually want to stop protein consumption as well. They can go in and they can get bad footage that occurs in those places, and it does occur, but does that mean that's how they operate all the time? No, it doesn't. So we want to actually start people understanding the two-part empathic to plate and how it is done and how it can be done better as well. So for myself, a long time ago when I put the first load of cattle on the back of a truck, I made that, I was like, holy shit, what am I doing? I've just raised these animals for 2.5 years. I can stand in a yard with them and they'll have no fear of me at all. And here I am putting them on the back of a truck. That was my sort of epiphany moment. And, I thought, well, maybe I'll give up eating meat. That lasted for about 10 seconds. I love eating meat. But what I did at that time is make a commitment to do it better. And that's what 10 years ago, that was what has got me to this point as well. I want to see it done better, and I want this to become the normal. Now, whether it's mobile or small-scale abattoirs or whatever, there's a number of different solutions. It doesn't really matter. But I think we can do better. And in a country like Australia, where we can afford to pay for our ethics, and that's a whole nother story, I won't get into that, but we do have high wages that we can actually make active choices to the food that we eat. I think this is the right place to lead this. Customer validation of provenance. So one of the things that we were really at the start is, how do people know where it comes from. How can we, just because we've got a website and says, we go to, Jane Bloggs' farm and here it is, and there's a photo that we haven't updated for 4 years, and, that farm's actually closed down and, someone else has bought it and it's all changed. How consumers want more than that. How do we actually connect that? And that's when we had the fortune that we've been looking worldwide, and we've got close connections with the Swedish company Helsingin, almost got that right, which is a company that started a mobile slaughtery 4 years ago, and they're now our close friends with us. And they developed an app which actually, through a QR code, can actually connect the purchase of the product in real time back to exactly that animal and that farm that it comes from. Now, our biggest decision now is how much information do we give the consumer? Do they actually really want to know that it was J165B who was, whatever genetic line of the breed that they have on that farm? We think not. But what we do think is that they want to be able to validate which farm it comes from. And this QR code that will be on the retail ready packs will change every time you do it. So that's where we think that we can really connect with the consumers, because they're going to find out that, this week we're doing Angus, next week we're doing Hereford, Belted Galloway, Shorthorn. We want people to start actively understanding what they're eating as regard to a breed, because they've all got slightly different characteristics for cooking and for eating. And when I get really excited, I start talking about the terroir of beef. So, 30 years ago, if you had wine, it was red or white. What do you want? Now we start talking about Pinots, late harvest, cool temperature. There's all of that diversity there, which actually just creates this whole path for small brands to arise. And, you look at how the wine's done it. So maybe I'm getting a bit excited, but that's what I'd like to see one day. And this is probably the key part that for us that we constantly try to reinforce ourselves. It's very comfortable coming here and talking to you guys who get what we're talking about, to understand what it is your farmers, you've adopted regenerative or holistic farming practices, you understand where it is you're connected. But how do we get outside the echo chamber? How do we actually make real change? And for us to make real change, as much as I love talking to you, I need to be talking to 10,000 people who have no idea what the difference between beef and lamb and all of that. That's where we have to get to if we're going to change the system. So that's where we try and spend as much time pushing outside the echo chamber, which generally when you do that, no one's listening. But if we keep going, I think that's a really key, because we really do believe that when you know better, people do better. So this is our 6-star promise, and all the stuff that I've spoken about before is the basis as to why we've gone there. We see ourselves as making a promise to the consumers of what we're doing, which is all of these. And obviously it's a pretty big, when they talk about BHAGs, or big, hairy, audacious goals, I think this is the biggest one that I've ever done. And you cannot do it on your own. So I've been really, really fortunate that just through pure fortune or the stars aligning, I came into contact with these incredible people. We've lived in each other's pockets for the last 2.5 years, quite literally sometimes. We're all over Australia. We've broken Skype and Zoom and every other sort of multimedia connection tool. And we are located all over Australia. So we have a couple in central Victoria, one in Townsville, I'm down in Geelong, Sarah's in Townsville as well. So it really is a national company, but it shows when you have a common desire of changing something, what can happen. So we are a product, not a service. That's probably one of the first questions that we have. People go, this is fantastic, I've got 2 cows set aside, if you can come down and do that, that would be fabulous. The reason that we're not is purely economic. It's a very expensive piece of kit. We don't say how much it actually costs to build, but it's got 7 figures in it. We had to go and sell a chunk of the company. We've gone through and we've had MLA funding. We've done every tax rebate that you can get and grants and everything else. So we've spent a lot of money to build this. And one of the key things that all of our shareholders want is How are you going to protect the brand? This is a great idea, but in the end, if it's a service, it's an entirely different proposition to if it's a product. So that's why we take it through the product, because we're an integrated company and we can actually get it to the end consumer in the state that we wanted it to from the start of the process. Could a service model work? I don't know. One of the things that farmers are very keen of, this is great, if you can come and do my cows. And it's like, great, so where do I leave the head and the hoof and the hide and the eviscerate and the... I thought you'd take that away. Oh, okay, so you're actually only interested in 52% of the animal, not the other 48% of the animal. And this is where a lot of these systems fall down. So our proposition is, you guys are farmers, be the best bloody farmers that you can, produce amazing quality livestock in the highest welfare possible. We'll take it from that point through to the end consumer without the need for transportation on there as well. So that's our value proposition. And the last one that I'm going to wrap up with is, I've, for the last 2 years, had Excel spreadsheets coming out of my head about permutations and combinations of costs of meat and offal and tails and tongue and blah, 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 blah. I truly believe that it is one of the most complex businesses to be in. It's one of the very few that you actually start off with a whole and you end up with a lot of pieces. Most of them, like a car, you start off with a whole lot of pieces and you make a single thing at the end, which is really kind of easy because you determine how many pieces you're going to buy at the start. Now, when you actually have your starting raw material and then you end up with a whole lot of pieces, of which humans eat 52%, then you've got to find out where the other 48%, and of that 52%, only 25% most people really like, and then the ones that are going to pay lots of money only really want about 2% of it. And the demand for that's really high, but it's not balanced across all of it. You know, this is the standard problems that every abattoir happens. So with our business, we're not an existing business that have already got revenue and cash flow coming through. We've run 2 years from capital raise to actually going launch. So the analogy that I say is, it's pretty much like throwing up 100 pieces of a jigsaw and slamming them down perfectly on the table when you go, because it is a big jigsaw puzzle. Everything is interconnected to everything else. And if something doesn't fit, you've got a bloody big hole that you have to fix very quickly. This is one of the fundamental problems when you look at the economics of abattoirs, is they get to a certain size. And once they flick the switch and turn an abattoir on, it's extremely expensive to turn that off, even for 1 day. It's got massive fixed costs of the refrigeration, the staff and so forth. And this is, in my belief, one of the reasons as to why we have seen regional abattoirs shut down or scale up. Because in the commodity-based meat system, scale wins. And when the tough times come, which they're coming now, with the drought that we've just seen, there's going to be a massive meat shortage. Those that aren't flexible and adaptive or massively large are really going to have problems with that. It's just a pure supply and demand issue. So for us to counter that, we launched a crowdfunding campaign, which is in its last week. Here comes the plug, get ready for it. And we have so far raised just about 45,000, which will get us going for the first couple of weeks, which is really important, is getting that cash flow going in the first couple of weeks from that. We want it to be more than that, and what we're doing is we're selling packs of meat, which is our business model that we're going to be in. So people can actually jump on board and get a pack and be one of the first in Australia to enjoy this quality meat. So there's a little URL. So thank you very much for your time. Hopefully you found it interesting, and then we'll play this little video, which I have to thank Jane and her team for pulling together. It's just so well done. Provenir is an integrated meat startup company that is taking the abattoir to the farm and to the animal, right through to retail ready packaged meat for the consumer.
Provenir to me is about animal welfare at that critical time at the end of the animal's life and accessibility to processing for farmers.
The animals don't have to go through the stress of being transported. The farmers don't have the transport costs, so there's an economic benefit. And the consumer can purchase high welfare meat knowing that the animal's been respected.
It's very much driven from the meat being the best that the meat can possibly be. There's many people that I've spoken to who talk about the production cycle that we have in Australia and the fact that we fail in the last 2 to 3 days.
The current system, in our view, is flawed in the fact that we're stressing the animals before consumption. That's where Provenir removes all of that. We think it's the start of a change in the meat industry. We can adopt these high welfare production systems, be commercially viable and provide a traceability to the consumer right back to the farm. Now, we've got a number of farmers that we're going to be working with. We see them as partners because we're working on their farm on a very regular basis. And we want to tell their stories. And we've got a really clever digital provenance platform for doing that. On all of our packs, there'll be a QR code. On the smartphone, you can see exactly which farm it has come from and tell the story of that farm.
Where technology comes into it is following that through the butchery and right onto the meat package that the consumer picks up so that they know exactly where that cut has come from, who the farmer was, and they can understand where that cow was raised, how it was raised, what pasture it was raised on, what conditions it was raised in, and why.
So when they buy Provenir, they know about the consistency and the quality, but what we're advocating is different types of cattle and different types of farms and telling that story as well. So we might be having Angus today, Hereford tomorrow, Shorthorn next week. All of them fabulous eating qualities, and that's something that we really want to bring to the Australian public, an appreciation of the diversity of the different eating qualities of beef. Consumers are increasingly wanting to know the provenance and validating it themselves, and I think that Provenir has taken it to a new level in Australia.
Our Possible campaign is not about raising money to fund the mobile processing facility. That's already happening. It's about giving you the opportunity to be the first to get your hands on tasty rewards, including our Provenir meat packs. If quality meat's important to you, if animal welfare is important to you, get involved. Click the link, pledge your support, and come on the journey with us.
So we're just about to launch. We've got our farmers, we've got the unit, we've got the sales and distribution. So now's the time to jump on board. It's going to be a first, it's going to be amazing.